Shedeur Sanders and Deshaun Watson getting really good news the week of the upcoming draft, as the Browns are already taking calls about the number 6 picks, and sources said that they're open to moving it. There's been conversation about moving back a lot, right? You're at that that 6th spot, unless you want a Ty Simpson, right? You know, it probably doesn't seem like there's many quarterbacks in range there. So this to me feels like, and this is something that, you know, in the world of draft news, you know, maybe they're kind of slow rolling out there. That's really broadcasting to the world, hey,
what if everything you thought about the Browns' quarterback situation is completely wrong? Because right now, while everyone is distracted by the hype, the headlines, and the noise around the upcoming NFL draft, something much bigger is quietly unfolding behind the scenes, and it could completely reshape the future of both Shedeur Sanders and Deshaun Watson in ways nobody saw coming. This isn't just another draft story. This isn't just about who gets picked where. This is about power, control, and a front office making calculated moves that signal one thing loud and clear. A major shift is coming. Let's start with what's actually happening. The Cleveland Browns are sitting at the number 6 pick. On paper, that sounds like a golden opportunity to land a top-tier talent, maybe even a quarterback. But here's where things get interesting. They're already taking calls, not just listening casually, but seriously considering moving that pick. And not just slightly. They're open to trading back. Now think about what that means. If the Browns were desperate for a quarterback, if they were unsure about their current QB room, if they were panicking about the future, there's no way they entertain moving. Down. You stay put. You take your guy. You secure your future. But that's not what's happening.
Hey, this is the quarterback room we got. We might get somebody in the 5th or 4th round, but as it pertains to the quarterback competition, because there's no way you're drafting a project player to compete in a quarterback position. That's just not how that works. That's not how competent organizations. You don't have somebody that you're not sure about compete with guys that you need to know if you're sure about. So if this happens and the number 6 trade gets traded back, they're going to add value. They're going to get an offensive lineman. They're going to get some.
Instead, everything we're seeing suggests the opposite. The Browns are signaling confidence, not just in one quarterback, but in the room as a whole. And that's where this becomes massive news for both Shedeur Sanders and Deshaun Watson. Because when a team is willing to pass on a top pick, when they're willing to trade back and stack assets instead of chasing a QB, they're basically telling the entire league, we're good at quarterback. And that changes everything. Now, suddenly, this isn't a desperate franchise searching for answers. This is a team building around what they already have. And that's a completely different mindset. But here's where it gets even deeper. Multiple sources are saying that this year's draft might not be as aggressive as previous ones. In fact, more teams are looking to trade down than trade up. That creates a strange situation where deals are harder to make, and when they do happen, they're more about positioning than blockbuster moves. So if the Browns still manage to pull off a trade back in this kind of environment, it means they're committed to this strategy. And what's the strategy? Simple. Build around the quarterback, not replace him. That's why this is such a big moment for both Sanders and Watson. Because instead of bringing in immediate competition, the Browns are more likely to invest in offensive weapons, protection, and depth. We're talking offensive, linemen, wide receivers, playmakers, pieces that don't threaten the quarterback, but elevate him. And if you really think about it, that's the best case scenario for any QB battle. Because now, whoever wins that QB1 job isn't just stepping into a role. They're stepping into an environment built for success. And that's where things start to get dangerous.
6 pick, and sources said they're open to moving it. Another move back would get the Browns more capital in draft, which they already scheduled to have 9 picks, including the number 6 and number 24 in the 1st round. A potential trade-up candidate in the eyes of some are the Cowboys. We talked about the Cowboys. We talked about that trade scenario, and I think that's interesting. I want to harp on this, right? There's one thing to be positive for, you know, both Shedeur and Deshaun to be like, hey, there's not going to be a real deal threat as a quarterback coming in here.
Imagine a young quarterback like Shedeur Sanders walking into a system loaded with fresh talent, a stronger offensive line, new receiving weapons, more depth across the board. That's not just an opportunity, that's a launch pad. But at the same time, you can't ignore Deshaun Watson, because while all the attention is shifting toward the future, he's still very much part of the present. And if the Browns are choosing to build instead of replace, that means they still believe in what he can do. So now, instead of a one-sided situation, we've got a real competition, not the kind where a rookie is thrown in just to develop, but a genuine battle where both quarterbacks have something to prove. And here's the key point that most people are missing. Teams don't bring in project quarterbacks to compete for a starting job. That's not how competent organizations operate. You don't gamble at the most important position in sports. You either know or you don't. So if the Browns aren't drafting a QB early, it's because they already believe they have their answer in that room. Now let's talk about what happens next. If Cleveland trades back, they're adding value, more picks, more flexibility, more chances to hit on key positions. And this is where the front office can really change the trajectory of the team. Because instead of relying on one big pick, they can stack multiple impactful players. And history shows that some of the most important contributors don't always come from the top of the draft. Second-round picks, third-round gems, players who step in immediately and make a difference. That's how you build a contender, and if the Browns execute this correctly, they could walk away from this draft with one of the deepest, most balanced rosters they've had in years, which brings us back to the quarterbacks. Because now, it's not just about talent, it's about situation. The QB1, whoever that ends up being, is going to have more support than we've seen in a long time, and that changes the expectations completely. Now there are no excuses. Now it's about performance. Now it's about proving you're the guy. But there's another layer to this story that's starting to surface, and it involves the wide receiver class, because while the quarterback situation is stabilizing, the receiver market is anything but. Opinions are all over the place. Some scouts are high on certain players, others are raising concerns. Some see elite talent, others see risk. And that uncertainty actually plays into the Browns' hands, because if you're trading back, you're not locked into one option. You can wait, you can evaluate, you can strike when the value makes sense, and with so many conflicting opinions, there's a real chance that a top-tier receiver falls right into their lap. Now imagine pairing that kind of talent with an upgraded offensive line and a quarterback who's already familiar with the system. That's a recipe for explosive growth. But let's not ignore the criticism surrounding Shedeur Sanders. There's been talk about his college system, questions about whether he's pro-ready, concerns about how quickly he can adapt. And while those conversations sound serious, they're also a bit misleading. Because here's the reality. Very few college quarterbacks come into the NFL running a true pro-style offense. Most systems are tailored to college play. Different reads, different responsibilities, different pacing. So, when people act like this is a unique problem, it's not. It's the norm. The difference is how quickly a player adjusts, and that's where coaching comes in. Because time and time again, we've seen quarterbacks struggle early, only to improve dramatically once they're in the right system with the right guidance. Development isn't instant. It's a process. And if the Browns believe they can guide that process, then Sanders becomes a very intriguing piece of the puzzle. But here's the twist. Some believe this entire QB competition narrative might not even be as real as it seems. What if this isn't about uncertainty, but about preparation? What if the Browns already have a direction in mind, and this is just part of the buildup? Because when you look at the signals, the willingness to trade back, the focus on adding weapons, the lack of urgency to draft a quarterback early, it starts to paint a very specific picture, a picture where the future is already being shaped. Quietly, strategically, and without the need for a headline move. And if that's true, then everything we're seeing right now is just the beginning. Because once the draft actually happens, once the moves are finalized, once the roster starts to take shape, that's when the real story begins. That's when we find out who QB1 really is. That's when we see whether the Browns' confidence pays off or backfires. And that's when players like Shedeur Sanders and Deshaun Watson either rise to the moment or get left behind. So the question isn't just what the Browns will do with the number 6 pick. The real question is, what are they building toward? Because whatever it is, it's clear they're not thinking small. And if you're paying attention, you can already see the shift happening. The moves, the signals, the strategy. It's all pointing in one direction. A direction that could change everything.